We are going to be in Genesis 37 today. Genesis 37, if you are visiting today, I want to say welcome to Christ the King Church. We started in January, working our way through the first book of the Bible, which is Genesis, made it all the way up to chapter 37. And if this is your first Sunday joining us, it's a good Sunday to do it because we are in a new section of the book of Genesis, starting the story of Joseph. And a lot of scholars have said it's sort of a little novelette within the greater story of Genesis. So a good point to jump on. How many of you are history buffs? Raise your hand. Wait, no, come on. This is interactive. So if you are a history buff, put it up there. Own it. Own the fact that you are a nerd. You look at that. I love history. I wish I had more time. When we were in Hawaii last month, I spent a lot of my time while I was just drinking coffee or doing other stuff, after Cam went to bed or stuff, just looking at documentaries of the history of Hawaii and learning more about it. And it answered a lot of questions for me. I'm the type of person, I have a lot of why questions. I look back, and one of my favorite memories of growing up in Canby was Myron Moore's third grade class. Just out of curiosity, how many of you had Myron Moore? Yeah, Mr. Moore. And the thing I remember most about the third grade was walking around downtown Canby and learning history of downtown Canby. Who W.H. Bear was and who, why it was called Baker Prairie. All these different things that have stuck with me. I used to love listening to a friend of our family's, Bill Garmeyer, who grew up here, and hearing stories about Canby. And I used to think, wow, he's really old and really has been here a long time. And recently I realized, as I'm talking to my kids, I'll be like, yeah, over there where that housing development is, there used to be a sheep field, and I'm like, okay, now I'm that guy too. But I love the history because it answers the question why a lot of times. Why? As we read through Genesis 37, I don't think I'm going to even have to say to you, put the question why in the front of your mind. As we read through this story today, you're not going to be able to help but look at this and go, why? Why? Well, let's read what it says. Genesis 37, starting at verse 1. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons. By the way, at this time he had 11 sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all of his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Just to bring out a few points here. Here we have the story of Jacob, whose name became Israel, and this is the makings of the nation of Israel. He had, at this time, 11 sons, and Jacob is falling into the same trap that his parents fell into. He's playing favorites. And so, at this time, Jacob had had 4 wives, had children by all 4, but there was one particular wife whom he really loved, and that was Rachel. Rachel was the mother of Joseph. And so there's this thing. Joseph is one of the youngest in the family. By the time he was born, Jacob was a little bit older. He ended up having this child with the woman that he was just in love and infatuated with. And so he looks at Joseph and he treats him differently than all the other sons. In the past, we've talked about that, just how it's not good for parents to show that type of favoritism in the family. It's very natural that we get along really good with certain personality types and struggle with other personality types. That's just a natural thing. So if you have multiple children, there are going to be some that you are able to get along with very easily, and others, it's going to be a little bit more work. And likewise, if you are flipped around on the other side and you look at your parents, you might have had one parent that you just clicked with right away. And the other parent, it was more work in order to understand them. Or if you have two parents and you don't click with either of them, there's a good chance they never told you you're adopted. But you look at this you look at this, and it's one of those things where this family has had generation after generation of these types of tensions going on, and it has now bled over where here's Joseph, a young man of 17. He's sent out to work in the field, but he brings a bad report about his brothers. What does that mean, a bad report? I don't know. We don't know. It doesn't say specifically. We don't know if it's a bad report like, Dad, they were shearing the sheep incorrectly, or if it was, Dad, they're out smoking cigarettes in the field. I don't know. And you're like, what? I'm just putting it in today's context. We don't know what it is. There's a good chance, this is what I think it is that they're not living according to the way Jacob has asked them to live. Because 2 chapters before this, what we saw was Jacob telling his family, hey, we're going to move on from Shechem, we're going to go to Bethel. We need to put away all of our household gods. We need to humble ourselves and strip ourselves of all this jewelry and all this finery that we have, and we're going back. We're shepherds. We're going to live for God. As we go further in the story, we're going to find that Jacob's sons, even though they were living in Bethel, that they took the flocks back to Shechem and headed back to the place that they just left. My feeling is it within the context that the bad report probably means, hey, Dad's told us to put away all of our idols. He's told us to live for God Almighty, for Yahweh, and yet they're sliding back into the culture around them. As a part of this, too, with just making matters worse, we see that Jacob gives Joseph what? A coat of many colors, a robe of many colors. How many of you have ever heard the story of Joseph before and seen pictures with Joseph with a robe with many colors on it, right? I grew up hearing this story at church all the time on the flannelgram. And, there was always flannel Joseph, and they would put on his flannel coat of many colors. And some of you are like, what? 1970s and 1980s high technology. Look it up, flannel graph. And it was just this thing, it was like this long robe full of many colors. Was it a robe of many colors? There's a good chance it wasn't. That's actually a Hebrew phrase that they don't exactly know how to translate. And some Hebrew scholars look at it and think that it should be translated a robe that is in great length. Others will say it's a robe with sleeves on it. The idea, it's only used one other place in the Bible, and it's used to describe a queen's royal gown and attire. So basically what this robe is, it's not just like, wow, look at Joseph, all those colors and bright. Joseph's all pimped out and stuff. It's nothing like that. It's more like he's coming out to work in a field where the shepherds are, and he's wearing a robe that is probably long, not good for the field, has ornate sleeves, not good for shepherding, and he struts out there showing it off to his brothers. Verse 5, the story goes on. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, And behold, my sheaf rose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. His brothers said to him, are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. And then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him. But his father kept the saying in mind. You look at this, and he's just making matters worse. Not only is he the favorite son, not only has his dad given him this expensive, ornate, beautiful robe, but the guy just doesn't know when to stop. He has one dream that's grandiose. He tells it to his brothers, and you would think he would learn his lesson on that one, not to say it. Not to say it, right? They hate him even more. And you know it. You've been around people when you step sideways and they suddenly don't like you. You know how the room fills with tension. You know the body posture changes, the faces change, the words that come out, the tone is different. And yet, he has a second dream, and this youngest son at the time cannot help but do what? Push the buttons. And so he says it again. And his brothers not only hate him, but now the word is they become jealous of him. Jealous of what their father has been doing with this son. Jealous, my guess is they might be able to see within Joseph a difference about him and recognize, yeah, Joseph is a pretty smart guy. Joseph has some talents that a lot of people don't have. And as we go further in this story in weeks to come, we're going to see that. He is incredibly wise. He's brilliant. And there's a jealousy that sets in with his family. But I do love this, that even though Jacob rebukes him, Jacob is a man of God, and Jacob himself has experienced prophetic dreams in the past. He's experienced those type of dreams where God spoke to him, first at Bethel, where they're living right now, in an amazing dream, with a stairway or a ladder that went from Bethel on earth all the way to heaven, and the angels of God moving back and forth between heaven and earth. Jacob knows very well that God can and does speak this way. So while he rebukes his son for coming out and saying these things, he keeps it in mind that maybe God is up to something and doing something. Verse 12, now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And he said to him, here I am. So he said to him, go, now see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word. So he sent him to the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. A man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, what are you seeking? I am seeking my brothers, Joseph said. Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock. And the man said, they have gone away, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, let us not take his life. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore. And they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, and there was no water in it. You look at this, and who's Reuben? Reuben is the oldest son of Jacob. He is the son of Leah. Reuben, it's an interesting part here because what we read previously is that Reuben actually fell into a very big sin issue by sleeping with one of his father's concubines or wives. And now what we see here in this story is Reuben doing something different. The story of Reuben's a very interesting one. We'll get into it more at the end of Genesis. But what you see in Reuben is this man where in this story, he's trying to save his brother's life. He's the oldest of all of them. He's the one who should take the lead and be in charge according to the culture here. But what we found, and what will make sense at the end of Genesis, is that by Reuben sleeping with one of his father's concubines, that in this day and age was actually a way that a man would try to supplant his father as head of the household. You see it throughout the Old Testament in different ways. Especially if you go to 1st and 2nd Samuel, you'll see that. It's one of those things where Reuben did something that was not only a sin in the sight of God, but culturally, it was one of the worst things he could have done to his father. So, there's going to be a power struggle within the family as well. Joseph has the favor of his father. Reuben should have the position of being the one in charge, though, of his brother. But we're going to see another character come into play here, and that's Judah. Judah, we're going to study a lot next week about his story. This is what we read in verse 25. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites. These are relatives of theirs, distant cousins, coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hands be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. Verse 29. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, the boy is gone, and where shall I go? And when they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood, and they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, this we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. And he identified it and said, it is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All of his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol, or the grave, to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him. And meanwhile, the Midianites had sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. At the beginning of this, I said that there was one question that will probably come to mind as you read it. Why? Like, why? Wow, what just happened here? This is a highly dysfunctional family. All right? This is a crazy story. What is going on with this? Well, first, at the very base level, you have bad blood between brothers. You look at this, and we've talked about what's going on here, but I think there is an application for us today. You have jealousy and immaturity butting heads against each other. Look at Joseph with this. He's 17 years old. 17 years old. He has blessings. He has favor. He's like the Ferris Bueller of Jewish people, right? Everything's just going his way. And he's there even to the point where God starts giving him these prophetic dreams. Incredible physical blessing, incredible spiritual blessing. And Joseph seems at this point to be proud, to be immature, and to not have enough wisdom in his life of what to say and what not to say. What to say and what not to say. 17 years old. I remember when I was 17. Some of you remember when I was 17 as well. I apologize. Man, I thought I knew so much at 17. I knew so much. I knew so much that I was dangerous, right? As a teenager, you're at this stage in life of growing where you have enough knowledge where you're not a toddler, you're not a child, you are a young adult, but not enough wisdom and experience to really know what to do with all of the knowledge you are gaining. And there's a big difference between knowledge and wisdom. A big difference between knowledge and wisdom. I look at this, and I'll tread carefully because some of my children are here, but I look at the women that my daughters have become today, and I can think back to their teenage years, and I just remember being so profoundly perplexed because they thought they knew so much as teenagers. But now, as they have gotten more mature, not older, more mature, there is a wisdom that is there that wasn't there in the past. And they don't get themselves into the same type of trouble. I look at my grandsons, and at their age, there's hardly any knowledge and absolutely no wisdom. It's pure manipulation on their part at this phase. It's easy for us to look at younger generations and see that. They don't have the same life experience yet. But just a word of caution to all of us as people who are seeking the Lord. The same thing happens in churches. And our tendency is to think it's based off a person's age, their physical age. And that's not true. Beaverton Foursquare Church with Ron Mell. Anyone remember Ron Mell? Yeah, he was such a great preacher, great Bible teacher. And I remember him doing an entire sermon on this topic. And just saying, he went through physically what it's like to have a newborn, what it's like to have an infant, what it's like to have a toddler, what it's like to have a child, a preteen, a teen, college age, and really spelled it out in very real terms, but then compared that to our spiritual walk with the Lord. And one of the problems I see over and over in the church is I think within Christianity today, we have a lot of people that are spiritual teenagers. Spiritual teenagers. They have enough knowledge that they know they're not infants, toddlers, or children anymore. There's more that they understand, but not enough wisdom and discernment to know how to handle the knowledge or even the gifts that they have from the Lord. And like Joseph, they just go around pushing buttons everywhere they go and then get a martyr complex. Why is it every church I go to, I get sideways with the pastor? Why is it whenever I get into a small group, I'm always the person arguing with people? Can't people see the spiritual gifts I have and the things that God is doing in my life? And why won't they give me this position or that position or the other position? If that's your thinking, you're a teenager. You're a teenager. Get to the point of humility. Get to the point of still realizing there's more that you have to learn. Man, I have the honor and privilege to get to spend huge portions of my week, hours and hours every week, in praying and studying the Word and being able to present it through preaching and teaching. And man, the more I do it, the more anxiety I have on Sunday mornings. I came here today full of anxiety, looking at this passage, and just, it's like, Lord, I barely understand this passage. There is so much here, layer upon layer, so much depth, and it connects throughout the entire Bible in ways that are just exciting and just incredible. The digger I deep into the Word of God, and the more I ponder the mysteries of God, oh man, the more I realize I don't know that much. I don't know that much. If you think you know a lot about God, oh, brother or sister, be humbled, because you probably aren't even scratching the surface of this incredible, beautiful, omnipotent, omniscient, eternal God that we serve. Joseph should have been humbled, but he was not, and it stirred up this resentment within his siblings to the point of jealousy. And let me flip this around as well. A warning. Don't ever be jealous when God is working and moving in somebody else's life. Don't ever be jealous if somebody else is experiencing the blessings of God in ways that you haven't experienced or ways that you've always wanted to experience. He is a God of sovereignty and grace. And one of the things that we find throughout his word is he takes his people, his sheep, and he handles them very differently. Very differently. I don't have time today, but as I was just considering this, there were so many parables of Jesus where he was trying to get that through to people. That God is sovereign. He is the master. He can call anybody to what he wants to call them to. He gets to gift people the way he wants to gift them. Some people, he gifts them with the blessing of resources and finances and gives them the gift of giving. Others of us, he doesn't do that to because he knows us and he knows we would go spend it all on ridiculous things, right? Some people get jealous of other people. Some of the ones I see most in church are the areas that have to do with being upfront. A lot of people want to be preachers and teachers. Can I just say this? No, you don't. No, you don't. And if you need more clarification on that, take me to coffee. I'll explain it all. One of the big things is people want to be up here on worship team. And it's this hard tension that we have. All churches have this with people that aren't gifted in music wanting to be on the worship team because they look at it and think, ooh, that looks like fun. This is a lot of hard work. They put in so many hours to do this, and there's a lot to it. I appreciated a friend of mine. It was actually, his name's Sean Smith. He was Brett Harvey's college roommate, so that explains something right there. But he's an associate pastor at a church, and Sean just put out this great Instagram reel where he was just saying, hey, I have something really serious. I wanted to talk to you guys. You people, Christians, people in the church, there's something I really need to share with you, something I've wanted to say for a long time, and I need to get this off my chest, and, I apologize if this is really hard for you to hear, but some of you can't sing, right? I thought it was going to be this deeply spiritual thing, and he's just like, some of you can't sing. Like me, I can't sing, and how much better it is if we actually figure out what our gifts are and use those gifts for the body. And I was just like, yes, Sean, thank you, right? It was such a good message. Brothers and sisters, when God is moving in your life, and if he has gifted you and he's doing things in your life, be humble. And when you look at somebody else who has a gift that you wish you had, when you look at somebody else who seems to have more favor than you for some reason, don't be jealous. Be thankful because God is moving in their life, just like he's actually moving in yours as well, but in a different way. You look at this passage, and that's the level right there that has a lot of depth to it, and we could explore this a whole lot more. Warren Wiersbe's commentary on Genesis in this section, let's see. The first half of Genesis, I think it was called Obey, and this one's called Be or something. And Warren Wiersbe, he likes to take it, and it's good stuff, but just to look at it like that. Very practical, how does this relate to us in that way? There is something else going on here, and once again, it's on the national level. When was this book written? After Moses had brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, and they'd been saved and they'd been rescued. And one of the things God tells Moses to do is start to organize them in the camp. They have the tabernacle that is being built, the tent of meeting where sacrifices and worship and prayer and praise take place, and situated all around this are the different tribes of Israel. How many tribes? 12. They are represented by the sons of Jacob. And all of this takes place as God gives Moses these words to write down. So it's a history lesson to the tribes of Israel. A history lesson looking back and saying, this is how these tribes were formed. 400 years ago, this is where we came from and what was happening in the lives of our ancestors. This is what happens when there's bad blood between brothers, this fighting and this bickering that if it just grows, it gets infected and turns into something deadly. And in Moses' time, this would have been one of these sections where to the tribes of Israel, they're learning we are individual tribes. Oh, but man, we need to learn to get together. There needs to be unity if we're going to be a nation. We're separate tribes, but we are one nation called by God. And we can't have this type of bad blood, otherwise it'll ruin us. That'll preach. That's a message to the church. When we come today and we take communion during our last song, one of the things Paul tells us about taking communion is to examine ourselves. And if we realize we have something against another brother, that we're not to actually take communion, but we're to go to that brother or sister and ask for forgiveness, extend forgiveness, And yes, I said extend forgiveness. There are a lot of pastors that preach that you don't have to forgive somebody if they haven't repented and asked for forgiveness. That's not the example of Jesus Christ. Because while he was hanging on a cross, he prayed to his Father, looking at the people that were crucifying him and saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. And that forgiveness you extend might be the thing that breaks through into that person's life. But here's something even crazier about this whole story. Can we go a little bit deeper? What time is it? I'll go quick. Some of you are like, I got a brisket smoking right now, and I got to check it. If that's the case, there's modern technology. Get the app, and you can check it on your phone while you're at church. What was Joseph's second dream he had? His second dream was that he saw the sun and the moon and these 11 stars. He's one, but the 11 represent his brothers, and that they're bowing down to him. Is there any place else where we read about something like that? Well, go from Genesis clear to the other end of your Bible. Revelation chapter 12. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. We'll read the rest in 1 second. You see the connection? And here's the beautiful thing about the Word of God. A lot of people today will try to tell you, oh, these are just separate books written at different times by different authors. Is that true? Yes. But it is inspired by the Holy Spirit of God, and they connect like this in so many ways that we just don't see most of the time. This is something that is so easily slips past people because it's not in quotes. It's not in quotes. But as Jesus sent angels to John the apostle and said, write this stuff down. Here are all these visions about the future. He's connecting it back to things in the Old Testament from Genesis through Malachi. A great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun and with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars in heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood up before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour her. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. What? What's going on? I don't have the time to dig completely into this, because we'd not only have to go to from Genesis to Revelation, but also to Daniel chapter 7 and a few other places in the Bible to try to connect all these dots. Let me sum it up this way. Israel is still important to the Lord. You've heard me say that several times throughout this series. Some people have tried to, over the last few centuries, take Revelation 12 and say, oh, this is talking about the church. No, it's not. And John's making that clear by connecting this prophecy all the way back to Genesis chapter 37. What does the sun, the moon, and the 12 stars represent? The people and the nation of Israel. The people in the nation of Israel. Is this solely just about the nation of Israel? Yes and no, because everything in prophecy has multiple meanings. This is also clearly about Mary and the birth of Christ, who came out of the nation of Israel. What is this seven-headed red dragon that's really freaky looking? Is it Beelzebub? Yes, it is. It is. It's Satan, but it's also representing the world system and the nations that are sold out against God. Against God. Starting with Babylon, Medo-Persia, the Greek Empire, Rome, and every country that is alive today that is infected by Rome, including the United States of America. Culturally, politically, we are Rome. This dragon that wants to come against God's people, that wants to come against this child who is the Messiah. And one day he will put this all back in order because he is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And little did Joseph know at that time that that dream went all the way to the Messiah himself. We can talk more of that. I know some of you are looking at the news today and what's happened this weekend in Israel. And just let me say this, pray for the peace of Israel. Some of you, if you're like, well, I'm not sure I believe you. I think that the church really did become Israel. Who cares? People are dying. Pray for them. Get your doctrinal arguments out of the way and pray for people who are dying, right? They need peace.